PKE, we've been talking a lot about some financial stuff like slicing the pie and basically mathematically how you split value between contributions. So you might be interested in that. I just wanted to let you know, and maybe we'll talk later.
No, I am. When it comes to developing new assets, Lauren, slicing the pie is the way to go. The second phase, which we just sort of get into here, is, well, you know, this is the concept of the rental credit requires having rentals. So slicing the pie creates the asset, and then, you know, monetizing the rentals comes once you've got the asset. So the two separate sort of ways of, one is development finance, and the other is sort of operational funding. That's the distinction. So two different sort of forms of finance there, basically. So anyway, well, good to see you, and good luck with the kids.
Bye, everyone.
Bye, Lauren.
Okay, so Chris.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's talk about intellectual property developed by a cooperative, and if we could account for the time and value that each person is adding. Yeah, so like, how do you see like a form of, well, do we need a legal form of ownership or an agreement, or yes, like what could you tell us what you did for PKE?
Right. Well, I don't know that we ever got to the bottom of that. You know, I think that's still a work in progress, because they're in sort of slice the pie mode, which is development. They haven't really decided, well, you know, it's too early to say that there is any IP to actually worry about. So they seem to be proceeding, you know, without worrying about that. No, they're the same non-dominium approach, if you like. The framework for intellectual property is no different than it would be for a wind turbine, is no different to what it would be for a piece of land, okay? IP is a productive asset. It has a value in use, okay? That value may be zero, or you may choose to give it away. And what the non-dominium essentially does, I think of it as something like a cooperative of cooperatives. You've got three key stakeholders within this framework, if you like. I've also heard it called a platform co-op. This is the way I think of a platform co-op. If you've got a productive asset, you've got the asset user. In a house, that's the occupier. With IP, it's the guy who uses the software or who watches the film. Then you've got the investor. And the investor can, if you like, invest money, dollars, or money's worth. Which is, you know, you put in your time, and there has to be some sort of agreement as to what that is worth. And that's the slicing the pie. That is done during the development phase. You know, you take a concept, you then come up with a sort of development partnership. I use LLPs, you guys could use LLCs, but you don't need to have a formal legal form to do it. You just need some sort of pie sharing agreement. And I could talk you through one I did with a film at some point. And then once it's finished, this is the key point, that you've got the users, you know, the productive asset user, you've got the productive asset into it, money or money's worth, and then you've got what I would call the manager, sort of like a managing partner, really, but somebody, he might be marketing, he might be with a property, it could be like, we call them a factor over here in Scotland. You know, somebody who looks after, you know, cleans the common areas, mows the lawn, you know, stuff like that. So, you know, like a managing partner. And what you do is you basically say, okay, we're paying X for the use of the asset. A proportion of that X goes to the manager, and the balance then goes to the investors to repay, or to essentially to give them the return on their investment. And it's the investment instrument that takes some getting your head around. Trust me on this. It's not debt, it's not equity, it's not a derivative, and it's not a coin or a token. It's prepayment at a discount. And this is a real paradigm thing. The fact that it's actually 500 years old or more, getting back on for 1,000 years, that the instrument, that's the thing that people really need to get their head around, and it's not easy. It took me about 6 months to realize what was going on. So these credits are essentially, imagine that I sell £10 worth of rent. I give you a token that's worth £10 worth of rent.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I don't give it to you. I sell it to you because, it's basically prepayment for rent.
Okay.
Are you going to give me £10 for a prepayment for rent? No, you're not. You want a discount. Okay. Prepayment requires a discount. Otherwise, the guy who's prepaying ain't going to prepay. This is the point.
That's a time value of money. Right?
Well, it's the time value of the money's worth that you're using is the way I look upon it. Okay. Mm-hmm. You're getting prepaid use value of a property. So I think of that as a rental credit. It could be prepaid energy, and that is worth whatever it is to you. It could be prepayment for Netflix or for, some other intellectual property,
subscription. Yeah.
So, but typically prepayment will always require a discount. With energy, it gets more interesting. Because, you might think the value of energy is going to go up in the future, and therefore you don't.
Or you can have solar panels and you're generating your own, getting reimbursed. Yeah, you're giving back.
Mm-hmm. Well, I've written a lot recently. Most of my work at the minute internationally, and this is with governments in particular, is on something called the energy credit obligation, which is the ECO, which is prepaid energy, essentially. And the beauty about an energy credit is it doesn't have a dollar sign or a euro sign or a rupee sign in front of it. And energy is denominated in joules, essentially. So it's a very interesting asset class, and it's a very interesting tool. In fact, I think it's going to change the world, but let's not get too excited about it. What we're talking about here is the framework within which these instruments can be issued, exchanged, and redeemed. Okay, that's we call that the clearing process in the in the financial world I came from. I don't know your background, guys. So you'll have to. What is your background, Derek? Just
I do have financial experience. I work on Wall Street. So what I'm thinking here, you're saying that the energy currently is in the market denominated in dollars, and that varies based on political, whatever. Mm-hmm. And now you're saying make the unit of energy, the joule, as the exchange?
Well, not so much the joule. What you say is it would be, because the average person doesn't understand what a joule is. But what we would say is, okay, the unit of account might be the energy equivalent in joules, although you and I don't need to know what that is, of say 10 kilowatt hours.
Okay.
10 kilowatt hours, we do understand. You see, a unit of account has to be an irrelevant amount. It's like you don't measure carpets in angstrom units and you don't measure carpets in light years, Yeah, you come up with a unit of measure which is relevant to the function. And that's what we have to do with exchange as well. So
but the cost changes over time. So that cost of that 10 kilowatt hours in dollars is going to fluctuate.
Well, the price of it, it is. But the interesting thing is that, for instance, you then get onto questions of how was that electricity produced? In fact, you and I don't use electricity because it would kill us. We use what electricity gives us. So I talk about energy as a service. Heat, mobility, power, maybe
Internet,
communication.
Right.
Internet, but there isn't much energy for that. But heat and mobility are the big ones. And and in my view, and I've written very widely on this, we're transitioning from a commodity market, energy as a commodity. So oil and gas traded as a commodity, which I was a director of a global energy exchange. Now ICE Futures. I was IP. I designed the UK natural gas futures contract, for instance. But that was a long, long time ago in a galaxy far, far away,
Right.
But point is that I think we're emerging into a services economy for two reasons. One is energy intensity, that where one barrel used to pump out 35, now it might do 10 or less. Mm-hmm. And you know, that's what Yamani said, was that the oil, you know, Stone Age didn't end because we ran out of stones, and the oil age isn't ending because we run out of oil. It's because it's becoming, you know, the energy intensity is now so high that people just cannot afford it. And I think that's exactly what's happened. $60 plus is way too high for people to afford. It leads to people saving it. The more expensive it is, the more profitable it is to save it. And of course, you and I don't use oil, so you and I wouldn't save oil.
Right, your car takes the gas, and the price keeps going up on the gas pump. Exactly. And if we can start saving services, you know, one of the things I looked at was, you'll have heard of James Watt, the Scottish inventor, and kilowatts. Yeah. Maybe?
Yeah. Most people have heard of him, but don't know what his business model was or became. He invented this new condensing boiler, much more efficient than previous boilers. He went to the Cornish tin mines who had a water pumping problem. He didn't sell his pumps as a commodity, as I call it, with a warranty that runs out after 2 years or whatever. He supplied his pump, the use of it, in exchange for a third of the coal they saved, right?
Okay.
Because he was confident that it was going to save a lot, and it did. And that gave him a different set of incentives. He had an incentive to improve it. He had an incentive for it to work. And right. I call that pumping as a service. I'm absolutely convinced that where we're going from here, is this sort of swap of IP use, which is what he had, for, you know, the use of energy as a savings of energy as a service. Because you see, the beauty of that, Eric, is they're made at the retail price. Okay, and you know, basically, you can make colossal savings because of it. And that, I think, is going to be probably one of the biggest business opportunities of the 21st century, actually.
Yeah. So how do you incentivize the exploration of renewables and finding the better fuel economy? Yeah.
Well, it's because you see, you can monetize that which is free. Energy savings are free at the point of use. If you can actually say, okay, I will sell, this is where the energy credit obligation comes in. You can actually come in and prepay. You go to people and say, how would you like to prepay your utility bills?
Sure.
And a lot of people will do that. You maybe already do. In fact, in this country, poor people prepay utility bills because they're not creditworthy. Uh-huh. So they're given a card, and you know what they say, the poor pay more. It's probably the same everywhere, you know. Uh-huh. But what we can do here, and this is where it gets really interesting. So in you know, I've done a lot of work, for instance, this is with my academic hat on, and not just academic, it's a sort of more than that, sort of national security comes into it. I've been to Iran 11 times now, and I've been working there on, you know, looking at business models, looking at the thinking is that if you use renewables, you don't need nuclear, right? So renewables is a good thing to have for countries like that. And I've also been looking at the business model over there. Because they, like Venezuela, like Russia, like most of the big energy producers, they throw away carbon fuels at a cosmic rate. They waste it. You know, Saudi burns 1 million barrels a day of crude oil in high summer, you know, and then they pump water 700 kilometers to Riyadh. You know, that is how stupid it gets. And like, you know, I think it's about 10 cents a litre in Iran right now because the dollar's so, you know, the currency's gone through the floor. And what I'm saying to them is, right, put your gasoline up to the global market price because it's 9 times that at the Turkish border. And they say, well, if we do that, we'll be hanging from the lampposts, you know, and they probably will. And I'm saying, well, if you put it right up and then compensate the population with energy credits, right? But energy credits would be used for mobility, right? This is the key point. Energy credits are actually on energy use. This is where the petro, this crazy currency of the Venezuelans, went wrong. You know, this cryptocurrency. First of all, it was on oil, and most people don't have refineries. That's point one. And secondly, it was a proof of ownership, really. But if I actually take that, petro and ask to pay for some oil, they'll say, well, forget it. It's just a proof. And this is where the whole blockchain coin, if you look at the coin as an instrument, it's a proof of past value transfer.
Yeah. It's a red ledger. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's if I walk into a shop and get a Mars bar, buy a Mars bar, I get a Mars bar receipt. Mm-hmm. If I come to you, Eric, and say, will you give me something for that Mars bar receipt? What are you going to say?
Depends on how I value your Mars bar and how I value your receipt, if it's worth anything to me. Yeah.
Well, no, the receipt is only worth something if you happen to be a collector of Mars bar receipts, and that's a particularly good example. Mm-hmm. It gives you no rights over a Mars bar. Mm-hmm. If, on the other hand, Mars, the manufacturer, issue a Mars bar voucher, then you may say, well, hang on a minute. Depends how hungry I am. If I'm starving, then I'll pay the full Mars bar price for the voucher, maybe, if it's the last one the guy's got. But, if on the other hand, it's I'm not hungry, then I'll certainly require a discount. You see the point?
It depends on the perception of the buyer of the value of the item and the currency. For another example is, like, I'm interested in vintage computers, and you could have got these at a thrift shop for $10 in 2000, but now they're going over $100 because people are back interested in them again. Yeah.
Absolutely, it's like the classic cars, isn't it? Same thing. Absolutely. Yeah. It comes down to things like provenance. Which is where there is a blockchain use. I think one of the few is authentication. But for me, the Achilles heel of the blockchain as a shared database is that you have to update the entire database for each new transaction, and that's just there's no need for it.
And the energy waste of computing. Yeah.
I invented a shared database for the oil market in 1998, and it still makes billions of dollars for ICE and CME. I didn't get a penny of it, It was a shared market transaction ledger, if you like. Okay.
I understand. I did database work.
Well, you'll know precisely. Well, this is worth it. This is worth exploring. Then, Eric, this is a really interesting conversation. Therefore, what I did, if you go way back to '98 or before, back then, if you and I did a deal over the phone, because it was all on the phone in the oil market, the minute I put the phone down, I would send you a fax or a telex saying this is the deal we did. Mm-hmm. Trade confirm. Because if I did, the market moved, you would say trade. What trade?
Yeah, I have a piece of paper. We did it at this price. Yeah.
Yeah, exact. And I thought at that time, well, hang on a minute. This is a bit, like telex is 100-year-old technology. Can we not do this online? And I invented something, I called it Oil Clear, which was three things. One was like a matching system, which is like, just a messaging system. That cost about 30,000. Second thing was the database schema. Yeah. And the third was, I called it a market user agreement. It's like an exchange rules, but at a meta level. Yeah. Because, there might be two exchanges and then a new one starts and you just plug that into the market and that becomes a standard,
Yeah, if they all agree on the data format, then they could net transactions together and just settle the difference through the Fed or whatever. Yeah.
Exactly. Well, what I was essentially doing was going beyond, for me, an exchange. I love the analogy of a universe. I'd sort of created something that was universal. And within that universe, you had solar systems. You know, an exchange is a nice analogy for a solar system. You know, transparency is the light, gravity is the liquidity. It's a really interesting analogy, you know. So I'd come up with a universe. So for me, it's like a market. And I invented a concept of a market domain. I was saying I applied for .market, but back then ICANN didn't even, you know, they're on a different planet back then, you know, and .oil I was looking for back then. Mm-hmm. But you know, my problem, Eric, was getting to market because everybody wanted to own it, you know. Mm-hmm. Sell side said, we want to own this. And I said, well, if you own it, the buy side won't use it. And the buy side said the same. We want to own it. And I said, well, if you own it, the sell side won't use it. And I went to Platts, you know, the oil industry news people. Mm-hmm. And because they basically provide news to the entire, you know, they were the oil market, like Reuters, you know. And they sat for about 3 months and then made one of the worst commercial decisions in history, I think. They said no. Because they said they didn't want to get involved in regulation. And they let it go. And at that point, I blew the whistle on what the investment banks were doing in the oil market without realizing it. And all my consultancy ran out. You'll never work in this town again, you know. Mm-hmm. And everything went pear-shaped. And basically, the exchanges took the idea and implemented it and fragmented it and made billions out of it.
Yeah.
which they still do. But point is, after all this, that the market user agreement, I realized, Eric, the market user agreement, you see, every contract or every market is defined by the contract in it. Okay. Mm-hmm. You know, the oil market is defined by oil contracts, the Brent market by Brent contracts. An exchange by the exchange's set of rules. Mm-hmm. And I'd come up with a sort of Uber protocol, if you like, an over protocol for, you know, literally into which you could plug anything. And that is what that becomes the non-dominion, because you've got the users, you've got the buyers, you've got the sellers, you've got market makers, but you also need, what I was doing, is the service provider to the platform, right? You know, so you've got the market platform and the market service provider.
Yeah, they may take a piece of each transaction or basis points.
Yeah, or share, absolutely, or share or whatever. And, you know, I came up with all that a long, long time ago, but I realized that, you know, you've got this problem, and I call it the sort of internet paradox, that if you're neutral, which I was, you're not liquid. And if you're liquid, you're not neutral. And that is the problem of this current market paradigm. And over the time in between, you know, a lot of time went by, and I was asked after the financial crash in 2008 to work on resilience with UCL, you know, because, you know, we came 2 hours away, Eric, from the cash machines going off over here, you know.
Oh, my. Yeah, I remember, yeah.
Yeah, you remember. And that's not a very resilient system. So that's why the former Minister of Defence, Lord Reid, he wasn't a Lord then, John Reid, he asked me and a few other people to sort of do some blue sky thinking. And that's what I've been doing, you know, and sort of action-based research. And I reckon we've come to some sort of conclusions, and we're busily working on, prototyping, proof of concept, because we emerge, we observe there's another crisis coming. No question, there's another crisis.
Yeah, quadrillions of dollars of made-up money. Yeah.
Yeah, but I don't think it's what a lot of people think it is, because a lot of people, I think, misunderstand what actually backs the dollar. They say, oh, it's just, there's nothing backing it. But I think you have to be careful with that, because it's essentially
reserves.
Well, I used to think that.
Okay, teach me.
It's such an interesting subject. We could probably talk about this all night. But suffice to say that all is not as it appears. I think Whereas 2008, Eric, was a credit and
credit crunch,
solvency problem.
Right.
What we're looking at now is not a solvency problem; it's a liquidity and market problem. There's any amount of money out there now. Banks don't have the capital to really create that much more new credit anymore. So it's the existing money is swirling around. And the problem is, with ETFs and whatnot and money market funds, and there's infinite money out there swirling around. And the problem is what I call market discontinuities. It's the crowded exit,
Yeah, you have to match up the timing of when these obligations are due.
Yes, that's the problem, Eric, that everybody runs for the, somebody, what is it they say, somebody shouts fire in the theater.
Right. Yeah. Well, it all depends on the confidence in, like in US, it's your dollar says something like
Yeah.
Yeah. Right.
It's a very interesting situation. And I think the risk is no longer really with the clearing banks. It's with the clearing houses. That's where market risk sits, and people don't realize how much actually the market risk is. You see discontinuities in just the other day, the oil market went like $4 in a day. You see Bitcoin, which is a very thin market, goes $800 in 3 trades.
It's a gambling economy, speculation.
It certainly is, Eric. It certainly is. So anyway, so I'm interested in the frameworks within which we can sort of come up with new ways of investing in a sort of non-toxic form. Sharing. It's all about sharing risk, sharing surplus, sharing costs, and sharing data, which is back to your IP point. Okay. The concept is within a non-dominium that data or the asset is essentially held not by a trustee, but by a custodian. And the difference between a trustee and a custodian is, as you'll know, a trustee says what will happen on behalf of, he's a fiduciary, whereas a custodian basically says what will not happen. It's it turns the sort of legal relationship around. Custodian is like a warehouse keeper. He's a custodian, and I think of a central bank as like a custodian of money, and he moves dollars around the warehouse of money. It's just that there's no longer gold in the dollars he moves around the warehouse of money. That's my sort of visualization of the central bank of today. So the idea is that we would create this framework, this market user agreement for data, but I think of it more as a club or a club of clubs. And the data would be held in custody. And the deal is that if somebody pays for the use of your data, you would have a pre-agreed percentage, whether it's a tithe or whatever it is. There would be a pre-agreed percentage would go to you. So if there is zero payment, well, 10% of nothing is nothing. If, on the other hand, there is a payment, 10% of something goes to you. And it goes on autopilot. It's just collected at the point of clearing. Okay. And I think that that framework I described, where you have an agreement between the market the users, and the platform service providers, I call it, who provides the services, and you're basically sharing his agreed costs, and giving him an incentive to do a good job, by the way, because it's like a managing partner, has an incentive to do a good job because he's on a piece of the gross, So the idea is to come up with a model where everybody has a win-win. And there is no zero sum. Does that make sense?
I like that no zero sum where everybody brings. Now, let's take it on another level. Think of like a book publisher and authors. Now, currently you have this intermediary, and the way the authors get paid, it's who knows. But what if you had micropayments, like maybe somebody only wanted one chapter of a book and they would pay a micropayment for that chapter, and they would get a secure download and they could use it in the paper or whatever they need to do with it. And then you can minimize the intermediary costs. Now, this is an idea from Ted Nelson. He calls it trans copyright.
Okay.
So that's the way he envisioned that the internet should have been built, where, right? So you could extend it into directions like that. And now also think of like other countries where they do microfinancing and get people starting up their own businesses. So I think there's plenty of applications for your ideas like that.
Yeah, I mean, it gets very interesting when you're on things like startups, you know, because I think the concept of a mutual guarantee, for instance, is a very powerful one. You get that, for instance, with micro loans, but I don't believe in loans in quite the way that is traditional, because the problem with the debt is that it's owed whether or not you can pay it. And for me, the better approach is to say, okay, let's actually, you know, share the risk up and down, you know,
yeah, you're right about risk. Yep.
And sharing of risk. I mean, there's some very interesting models emerging. Like, so Scottish farmers started clubbing together about 30 years ago. This is in the sort of mountainous area, and started sharing machinery, and then they started sharing the use of the contractors who work machinery. They started pooling, and then of course fuel, and then of course fertilizer, and basically they call these they're sort of very, very lightweight organizations, but more like clubs. They call them machinery rings. And because, you know, farmers are pretty natural cooperators, as I'm sure you know. And but the point is, they're still competing. They're competing on their produce, and they're competing on quality, but they are cooperating on costs. And I think there's going to be a lot of that, because essentially you're disintermediating there. You're taking, you know, you're cutting out middlemen with that one. And the other really good example is in the insurance world. You've got Lloyd's of London, you know, ship insurers. And there are some risks that Lloyd's won't take. So the ship owners, about 150 years ago, started clubbing together in what are called P&I clubs, protection and indemnity clubs. So the ship owners formed clubs and then employed a broker to manage the club and handle claims. So, you know, basically it's not insurance. They call it mutual assurance. And Thomas Miller, the broker, doesn't take the risk. They manage the risk. And this is, again, a classic disintermediated structure. And it's been around for 150 years, Eric, and it's multi-billion dollars. But nobody's heard of it.
And what about like the Mondragon Society in Spain?
They are co-ops, yes. But the trouble with co-ops is, in my opinion, that they use the conventional legal forms, you know, like a joint stock company. And then they sort of put a lid on the returns, you know. On the one hand, they put a lid on the returns, but the other, employee ownership is a brilliant thing. I'm all in favor of it, big time. But there are still issues with, for instance, raising new capital if they need it. They have, you know, you can have problems with loans. And for me, the investment, you know, the issue of prepaid credits offers a form of funding which is not debt and which is not equity. That's what's so powerful about it. It's not widely known, but that's what Enron did as well, because, you know, prepay is very, very dangerous if it's not transparent, and with Enron it wasn't. 70% of Enron's revenues never existed. Right, you know, that's why the creditors and the investors got shafted, because they didn't know that Enron was craftily, with like a three-way arrangement via two big banks, they were raising, funding via prepay arrangements.
So, if they had blockchain back then and everything was on a blockchain, people would have verified and known the truth. Or, you think?
Exactly. If there'd been a shared database, whatever you called it, exactly. A friend of mine calls it triple entry. So there's my books, your books, and shared books, right? Yep. Which is where the shared. That's a good expression, triple entry. Okay. And I invented a triple entry system way back. I didn't know that's what it was. And a guy I know called Todd Boyle in Seattle, he invented something called Web Ledger, which was, again, a shared transaction repository. And we could see 20 years ago how powerful that would be. But it wasn't until the blockchain came along that the subject sort of re-emerged,
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And I see the blockchain and coin as a bit like what the internet was. It's a bubble, but from that bubble will emerge something hugely powerful, as it did with the internet. So I talk about my work as in sort of FinTech 2.0, and if you sort of Google that, you'll find a lot of my writings are in that space. Mm-hmm. Because blockchain and coins, Eric, are essentially machine-centric. They don't touch people at all. And the interface with the people is where the difficult bits come in, What I'm about is people agreements first and machine transactions as subsidiary to them. Yeah.
Enforcing it. Yeah.
Exactly.
Smart contracts.
In a sense, these are smart contracts. So the slicing of the pie, for instance, is a smart contract. But I think of the contract as being a people contract. It doesn't really affect the machine. All the machines are doing is coming up with secure messaging,
right?
Essentially,
Go ahead, Drew.
What you what you essentially want to have is an incorruptible ledger, whatever that technology is. They're not all blockchains, but they're incorruptible and verifiable. So, being incorruptible and verifiable ledger is one thing, and then smart contract. Well, on Ethereum, the contracts aren't smart and they aren't contracts, but
good line.
But they could be, or they can be, potentially, and that you have the verifiable logic as well as the ledger is the thing that creates the value.
I agree with you that it's the incorruptibility of the transaction to me. Don't forget that you will very often need to actually amend a transaction, and the key to that is that it's an audit trail. My background in regulation, if there's one thing I knew you needed, it was, they used to say that there are two rules in fraud, because I was a fraud investigator for years. Number one is, if it looks too good to be true, it probably is. And the second one is, follow the money. Yeah. So audit trail, and this point about, you need authenticated, immutable data, but it doesn't mean to say that you can't change the transaction. The changes need to be visible. Transactions can be mistaken transactions, for instance. It's just that you need to have a protocol whereby both sides agree to a change to that transaction.
There you go.
Yeah,
it's a cancel correct or modify.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly so. And I mean, for me, the end game, the way I see it, is that we're in a mobile economy. I think that the end game will just be about 7 lines of code sitting on my smartphone, or not that smartphone, and 7 on yours. There'll be a handshake of some type, and we will then agree a transaction, and then everything else is protocols until you reach, you'll have some sort of, maybe a domain server, and that's about it. There won't be any middleware. There just won't be any. you know,
so you're talking peer-to-peer for software. Okay.
Yeah. I mean, and it will be essentially promises. You know, when I talk about peer-to-peer, you know,
yeah. Well,
you know, I might. We'll be talking about asset-based promises and people-based promises, and the acceptability of a promise would come, I think, within what I would think of as a mutual guarantee, like a, you know, I call it a guarantee society, this P&I club. I mean, I'm sure you'll know that the first credit cards came from Diners Club. No banks involved. It was a charge card. So, you know, basically 3 guys went off, had dinner together. One forgot his wallet. The restaurant owner said, well, pay me later. And that gave them the idea of what became Diners Club. And then the problem with that was it was just a charge card. You had to pay it off at the end of the month. And banks got involved in the carrying over and the funding of the continuing balance. And then it all went, you know, what then happened was each bank has, you know, started issuing its own cards. And of course, fraudsters then went round, you know, defrauding all the banks until D-Hop came along with Visa, you know, and linked them all together. It's fascinating. But point is, I don't see why local businesses should not club together with local people and extend credit to local people and each other.
Frontier financing. That's what I call it.
Sorry?
Frontier financing. You don't need any banks.
No, we need banking, but we don't need banks. Exactly. What you need, I call it a community credit card, and it's completely achievable. You need to have a service provider because the risk is, there's no credit risk, but there is a guarantee risk. You know, what you do is there's a performance risk. You give people a guarantee limit, and both sides of the transaction, the merchant pays a guarantee fee, and the user of the credit pays a guarantee fee. And we don't call, at the minute, we call that interest, but really it's the cost of performance and default, which is what you're doing, you know, is what you're insuring. We don't think of banks as guarantors, but that essentially is what they do. If I don't know you or do know you and don't trust you, then a bank comes between you and me and guarantees your credit and backs that guarantee with its balance sheet. That is what banks do, but we don't think of it that way. We do not. We think money comes in, you know, but really that's what's going on. Anyway, so I've covered a lot of ground, but I'm not even sure whether that's what you wanted me to talk about. So, you know,
if we go back a little bit,
yeah,
clarify a couple things. I mean, when you're talking about, you know, paying for the service, I mean, I was thinking, wow, suppose you paid $1 for 1,000 lumens of light for an hour.
Right, yeah.
All the incentives would be to use the least energy to produce that light.
Exactly.
You know, I mean, it just makes too much sense. I'm not sure how to connect that with the credit, the energy credit concept, or how that would apply, or if it applies to that.
Well, what it is, Jim, it's a different business model for the people who produce the lights or the turbines or the solar. Instead of selling the solar, what they're going to be doing is supplying the solar in exchange for a percentage of production or the value of production, okay? And they will monetize that through an entitlement to, you know, these eco units, as I call them, energy credit obligations, which will become essentially a generic form of currency. The circulation of energy credits, that's where this, I call it an energy clearing union, comes in. You need a sort of mutual guarantee, because what we're asking people to do is honor credits issued by other members of these clearing unions, right? You know, if I'm a supplier of energy and you come along and say, Chris, I've got some ecos here, I'd rather give you them than dollars, I'll say, that's cool, I'll accept them. And the reason I accept them is you're a member of such and such a clearing union, and so am I. You know, it takes away the need for trust, because I'm trusting the members of this clearing union rather than you. Yeah. It's a mutual guarantee. It's this P&I club. And it wouldn't so much be one big one. It would be lots of smaller ones which are members of a regional one, which are members of a national one. It's clubs of clubs of clubs of clubs. It's not hierarchical. It's a sort of flat nested, protocol of protocols. That's the way I see it panning out. Clubs of clubs are essentially lateral. That's how I think it will pan out. With energy credits will become pretty much universal currencies.
And then you'll have people who trust both clubs and will act to exchange so that these credits become more universal.
Yeah, I think it's like where it goes is, Jim, it goes like, you've got insurance and reinsurance, it becomes a bit like that a club will be, like 15 local clubs will be members of a regional club, and they'll be accounting among themselves for transactions, but essentially defaults, somebody might default or not perform somewhere, or a generator might go down is a good example. And the risk will then be pooled, and the production will be made up from maybe spare capacity and whatnot. That's the way I think it works. At the moment, the energy market we have is completely pathological. I remember in '95, I said then in the UK, because the market was just been invented, that it was absolutely insane. That what it would do is lead to a lack of resilience in the system in the end, and that's precisely what it did eventually.
Would you want to prevent securitization of these ecos or prevent derivatives? Like, is that the problem, that when people speculate and take bets on these currencies and derivatives?
Well, I don't think so, because these things are, they're a bit weird, really. They're sort of hybrid. They are two things. The typical thing, if you have a real estate investment trust, a REIT, for instance, then the risk you have is that you can't find a buyer for your units when you want to find a buyer for your units. That's your risk. All the buyers might walk away. Whereas with a rental credit, it's slightly different, because with a rental credit, and I'll come back to the energy, you might not find a financial buyer, but you can always sell your rental credits to people who live in the zone of which the REIT covers, because they will always buy a $1 rental credit at any price below $1, right? They will always buy it. They will always buy it below it. They'll buy it at the best price below $1. So if there's lots of sellers, then you might not get as good a price. But the price is limited. Rental credits will never sell for more than $1, because if the price went above $1, you'd say, well, sod that, I'll just pay $1. You know what I'm saying?
It's a discount instrument, essentially.
Precisely what it is. Precisely what it is. Now, with energy credits, again, it's more about use. You've got the option. You see, you've got the option of use. So it's a very useful savings instrument. Most people think, well, hang on a minute. All this talk about inflation hedging that we had in 2008, lots of money went into commodities and whatnot, and gold, because hedging inflation. And energy, I think, is a good inflation hedge. Some would argue it's the optimal one. But if I buy an energy credit, even if I can't find a buyer for it when I want to sell, like a financial buyer, an investor, I can still use it myself, or maybe find a neighbor or somebody locally, for instance, who buys it for use. It's a hybrid. And that's the beauty of it. It's, it's redeemable. It's redeemable, or returnable actually is better. Returnable. I mean, the one thing you can't do, you can't take your credit and say, right, Chris, I want you to deliver that electricity. That would be a futures contract. It's not that.
Right.
You could, what you can do is go to a supplier and say, right, I've got a token here, which you issued, or you're a member of a clearing union, and you therefore undertake to accept it in payment. And then your decision is, do I actually want to actually pay with this token or with this energy credit or not? And that, I think, Eric, depends on what your perception of what the future market prices are going to be over time. Because typically energy bills are for maybe a month's worth or a quarter's worth or whatever. But I think it will be a very useful sort of and stable asset class.
Yeah, and also energy companies can level out your billing over the year.
Yeah,
projected and past usage, so there's a bit more certainty.
Yeah. Well, I think one of the best uses we're going to find here, if an energy company is going to love this, is that they can fund themselves without paying compound interest. They will go to and similarly for property owners, my generation is long of land and short of care, right? And my boys are long of care and short of land.
Yep.
And well, we've made out like bandits. We really have. I was paid to go to school. I was, and my son is into a lot of debt, and it's the same everywhere. And I don't think that's actually sustainable. But one of the problems is that if you've got a lot of land, it's pretty illiquid, and equity release, as we call it. I think you have what was it? You call it reverse mortgages over there, you call it?
Yeah, we do it. Yep.
Yeah. We call it like, top-up mortgages and stuff. And there's two pretty toxic ways of equity release. One is a very nasty mortgage product, I think, which you reverse mortgage. And typically you pay a premium so that if you live a long time, you don't get your home taken away. And secondly, there's a reversion where somebody gambles on how long you're going to live, and buys half your house now, and then waits to collect on the rest until you die, And what I'm proposing is a different form of equity release, which is basically, okay, I'll sell you, 10 years worth of rent at a discount, something like that, So for me, this is going to be one of the biggest applications of the future. And it gets more interesting where, for instance, you can reward kids or people for caring for each other or caring for the land with rental credits,
Yeah, it's all about incentives. If you have the right incentive.
Exactly. I mean, I was a member of a housing co-op in London for 10 years, and it was the least cooperative co-op on the planet, because it was a short life one and nobody expected it to be around, so nobody did anything. But I was working on a buyout, so that was my motivation for being there. But I noticed, the interesting thing about a co-op, as we called it, fully mutual, was that I didn't own it. I wasn't an owner of this co-op, or even, I wasn't, didn't have a lease. I wasn't even a tenant. I was a member. I was a member of it. It was a sort of corporate. And because through my membership, I had the right to live there. Now, that's not a bad deal, actually. And what happened was people would volunteer and do the work that was needed, but you get this sort of, free rider syndrome sets in, and by God, that's what you got there. And you would find people could be there for 30 years and be the life and soul of the co-op and do all the work, and they leave with nothing. Yep. Yeah, sure. They've paid a rent, and let me tell you, it's a very affordable rent. very affordable rent because there's no mortgage. There's not. It's just basically at cost. But you leave with nothing. And this innovation I'm observing within the non-dominium of the rental credit means that the people who do the work in the co-op can be given rental credits for doing it. So if you look after the buildings or you look after each other, you get very interesting policy options coming in here, you see.
Yeah, if that work is tracked properly and everybody could see that these people did this work, these people did that work. That's the key. Yeah, it's transparency.
Yeah.
Now, coming back to an organization like Dig Life or PKE, I think...
Well, I don't know enough about Dig Life. Tell me a little bit about Dig Life at this point.
Well, it's creating a bunch of tools for collaboration. It's pulling together the technology we trust. So we're researching, evaluating products, and if it's not like taking our data and shipping it over wherever, we'll trust it and make it available to the members of Dig Life. And and Dig Life is going to have partners, other organizations who will share in the use of the technology, and we'll have arrangements with them of how they compensate. Yeah.
So this is where a membership model could come in, isn't it? Basically. Okay. Well, we'll have to develop this. Yeah, but go on, please.
Yeah, I think Joaquim is the person to discuss all of this with. Okay, so now for someone like me, like I have done independent consulting on my own, and I didn't like the whole process. You have to do everything and all your taxes and in addition to trying to develop software. So so like a co-op model would appeal to me if all the other stuff gets taken care of and I could focus on my talent and be rewarded fairly for that.
Yep.
Right.
Yeah. Well, do you know what? I'm enjoying this. I'm just sort of riffing here, you understand.
Yeah.
I thought, I don't know if you've come across it, but there's something called the Freelancers Union, based out of New York. And the clue is in the name. It is basically a group of freelancers. And the person who started it up came from the perspective that freelancers need health insurance in the US.
Yep.
And I think of it as like the glue. The glue that brought the Freelancers Union together was health insurance.
Yeah,
and having created that, then you can start hanging other, services on it, And I think where this leads actually is it's back to the future. My Danish grandfather was a master carpenter, a handwerker, as they called him. And we still have in the family the chest of drawers that was his masterpiece.
Wow.
Right? When he became the master. You have apprentice, journeyman, master.
Model, right?
And I think that's where this goes with people. You're obviously a master at what you do these days, and I think that the trouble is that people who are good at something, typically like salesmen, get promoted to managers and they're crap managers,
Peter principle.
And just what you said, what is needed is a platform where you can do what you're good at and work with and help to, you can mentor the apprentices and the journeymen. Yeah, it's a very similar process, and it's a sort of quasi 21st century guild approach. But you have a platform and you have services providers to the platform doing all the crap that you just said,
Yeah, and then a mentorship is a contract where I'm giving time. This person is going to show up and learn, and I'm going to evaluate their learning. And we both get credit for social credit.
Yeah. And then he becomes a journeyman and gets out into the world and develops
his work is validated. It's anyone could look at the previous work and if they want to hire him, they know.
And then when you're getting old and wise and you've had enough, you can maybe then you reach a point at which you're judged by your peers and they say, okay, well, cool, you've reached guru status,
So I think there's another interesting vector on that as well, which is not only can we have sort of, you know, tech folks doing all this work and everything else, there's also the prospect of mutual cooperation outside of domains. So multidisciplinary teams. So if I'm doing a whole bunch of mapping work, I can actually, you know, have an arrangement with someone who's a master in doing GIS and all that sort of stuff, so that I don't have to spend all my time gearing up on the problem domain, you know, and sort of having that mutual relationship that goes with that, and have that sort of, instead of being cramped into a vertical, you can sort of work across the horizontals more easily, and it's how that fits into models. I'm not sure, but I think it's an area where we're starting to see.
Well, this is where I think about you're getting into sort of project teams and what I call enterprises, which is like an ad hoc. You know, you come up with a concept, and the concept requires certain skills, and you will bring together the members, you know, of a team to you know, to provide those skills. And as you say, they are going to be ad hoc, and they're going to be multidisciplinary, and they will evolve with the project typically. You know, me, I'm a bit of a developer. I get bored once something is done. You know, my attention span is poor.
I'm running a code lab where we're doing precisely that. Cooperative. The work is the play, is the learning. And although it can be the blind leading the blind, we teach each other how to solve problems, how to learn, you know, to get the task done, and then we try to actually have a work product, you know, that comes out of the session. And there's the Climb That Mountain and the open learning in the Digital Life Collective. And I was sort of distracted when you were talking about gig life, but besides the cooperation as a service, where we're really experimenting with cooperation tools and using them ourselves and helping other groups to use them, there's development in what's called the social ledger. And I think, you know, this, much more than a financial ledger, incorporates the human and the organizational aspects of our interactions and our agreements and our transactions, as well as the other transactions. Open money, part of our roadmap, just sort of mutual credit, and I don't know if you have any other questions on Dig Life.
I'm going to have to do a runner, actually, guys. But this has been an interesting first discussion. Although, even though I've done most of the talking, you know.
One real quick thing, you know, the idea of an open source license. Stipulated that if you can sell it, you don't have to give it away for free. If you sell it, I would get a portion of the revenue. Do they have such a thing?
Well, there is something I've heard it called common source, but it doesn't work. It's a bit complex, and I don't know how well it works. I'm not familiar enough with it. I would call it club source, maybe, or something like that.
Exactly what you were talking about.
Well, you see, the beauty about a club is it's both open and closed. It's closed because only members can use it, but it's open to anybody who actually is prepared to go along with the rules, you know, essentially. So it's an interactive, two-way, consensual sort of arrangement. And it enables just what you said. It enables us to transcend this problem of charging, because if it is, you know, if something is paid, you can provide that a percentage goes either to an individual or maybe into a pot, or both. You know, you could have a tithe that goes to the public good for running the system, you know, or a small amount, or you could have, you know, I mean, some people might have an entitlement, but say, oh hell, I don't need it, I'm okay. You know, I'll put it into the training pot for the apprentices or something. You know, it's purely and simply what the members of the group, the club or the guild or whatever it is, say, look, this is the way we want it to be. This is what is fair. And I think, basically, I think we know what's fair when we see it, you know?
Yeah. And it may be that, you know, I've written this book and I want everyone to read it.
Yeah.
If they're making a profit.
Yeah.
My work.
Yeah.
It's only fair that I get a piece of it. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, Cory Doctorow has done some creative things with his books. He's exploring all kinds of Cory Doctorow. Yeah. So
very smart guy.
Yeah, he it's DRM free, and you pay for it if you want to support him, or you could download it somewhere else for free if you want it. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. It's down that road. Anyway, guys.
Yeah, thank you so much.
I think you'll have to log me out because I can never work out how to stop.
Oh, yeah, Jim, you could stop the meeting and save the recording, and please post it because other people want to watch it too. Okay.
Okay, guys. Good to meet you.